Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for another record collection update video. It has been about a month, give or take, since the last one that I've done, and obviously there have been no videos on the channel since then. A large part of that has been because of, again, work kind of kicking my ass lately. One of the big things that I've had to do was to fly out to St. Louis for a little over a week to do some stuff for my job down there. Now, the plus side of me being down there is I can go to some stores and things like that down in that area, St. Louis area, Kansas City area even, that I don't normally have access to. So I like to take full advantage of those opportunities when they come up. So as a result, I came back with a haul massive enough that despite my best efforts, I ended up being over my checked bag limit on my flight back. Fortunately, though, I don't think I ended up getting charged for it somehow. I was only a couple of pounds over, so, it is what it is. But I digress. It is about, in my city of Minneapolis right now, it is about 105 degree, or at least it feels about like it's 105 degrees. It's about 90, feels 105 because it's humid as shit down here. So I'm not really going to spend too much time getting into the preliminaries. Let's just get at it, go for it. Let's talk about these damn records. Now, the first two that I'm showing you here were actually online purchases. I do have a couple of other records that are on the way that I just purchased last night, but I didn't want to wait any longer to do this video, so you'll probably see them in the next one. This record I actually ordered online before I recorded the last one, and it only just came in not too long ago. Michael McDonald, Wide Open. This is the 2017 record, and as of now, the most recent proper studio album, I believe, by Michael McDonald, the man, the myth, the legend. I am very partial to Michael McDonald. I actually have heard all of his studio work, which might seem a little bit surprising to some. But I tend to think that his voice carries even the records that have slightly weaker material. And I think that's true in the 80s. I think that's true in the 90s. In the 2000s, for the most part, McDonald was very into covers records. He did Motown and Motown 2, Soul Speak. All those records are covers albums of classic soul tracks. And that dominated his output so much, along with Christmas music, that he didn't really have any original records for almost 20 years. And so this record came in to the picture, and I think it's genuinely quite good. And I think it's quite good because it is pretty... a lot of these tracks here are concerning McDonald's personal life, specifically tracks regarding kind of his... I believe he was seeking treatment for alcoholism at some point, not too long before this time, and this is him kind of reflecting on those thoughts and those emotions and things like that. And I think that translates really well into this instrumentation, which is very much not what you'd expect. It's a little bit maybe adult contemporary. Like, I'm not going to say you can't see how McDonald got from his 70s stuff with the Doobies and his 80s pop stuff to here, but with the kind of rootsier influences on tracks, especially that opening track, Hail Mary, which I genuinely love, I think it connects to something, and maybe that's because of this fallacy, this kind of fallacious thought that we have, that when you add like acoustic guitars or whatever, that it makes it more real somehow. Maybe I'm playing into that thought process too much. But in any case, it's a really good album, and I did want to own it because I did stumble upon it at a very transitional period in my life. And yeah, and I already owned one. I think I own one, maybe two Michael McDonald records on vinyl already. So yeah, definitely had to have that one. Okay. And the other one that I just ordered came all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. I have a good friend who lives out there. His name is Dylan Seavey, and the reason that I name drop him is because you may see him around in the YouTube sphere occasionally. He's done collaborations with a few different folks. He's appeared on podcasts. He's appeared on other YouTube channels. He's done some like Beatles-related appearances. He does a regular stint on the YouTube channel Tastes Like Music, talking about Bob Dylan. He's a very eloquent man. He's a great musician, drummer in a band called The Minx. They released an album last year called Creatures of Culture, and I'm talking it up because it is genuinely quite a good album. So check it out. But he's a great musician, great drummer, multi-instrumentalist, and one of the nicest, most genuine, and most passionate guys you'll ever meet. And in any case, he hooked me up with this thing from this record store that he works at down in Nashville, Final Tap. Go check it out. Belle and Sebastian, If You're Feeling Sinister. I love this album. This record is responsible for one of my most vivid, grounding music listening experiences ever. I heard it for the first time while walking on campus at my college, and I was walking around, and there was a fresh snowfall. There, like a foot of snow had just fallen that evening or something like that, and all the roads were closed, so there was no traffic in the streets. This was probably about midnight, 1 a.m. too. And so hearing these tracks, and obviously I think The Fox and the Snow in particular, really just hit hard. So, it hit so deeply. And while I've listened to a lot of other Belle and Sebastian records, although I'm not caught up with their full discography, I think I dipped out at around 2010-ish when diving through their stuff. And while I really like several of their other records, I think their debut, Tiger Milk, is fantastic. This one, I think, is always going to have that special place in my heart because of the nature of that first experience. Stars Attracting People, Me and the Major, Like Dylan in the Movies, The Fox and the Snow, title track, The Boy Done Wrong Again. I think there's just so many sharp bits of songwriting on here that are matched with this great playing that is not as breezy as it appears, but again, it feels effortless, I suppose. And it typifies a lot of what indie rock would become in the 2000s and 2010s, I think. And yet does it so much better than so many of those other acts ever did. And it was great. It was a $15 purchase, that one was, by the way, not including shipping. So I was very pleased to see it, and it's in, used. It's a used record, but it's in very good condition. So really recommend it. Okay, so now everything else in this pile is Missouri Vines. I should point out that I did buy a bunch of CDs while I was down there. I've been on a Bob Dylan kick lately, so a lot of the CDs were Dylan records, like the Basement Tapes, and Slow Train Coming, and the first few editions of the Bootleg series. So I've been slowly trying to get properly complete on Bob Dylan on CD, but we don't have enough time to go through all those, so I won't be covering those in this video. But instead, let's cover all these other records that I got. Starting with an album that I got for $5, and I'm not even kidding you. 50% off at Barnes & Noble, plus I had $10 in stamps, or whatever their rewards feature is. Leonard Cohen, Thanks for the Dance. This is the final Leonard Cohen record, as far as we know anyways. The first posthumous Leonard Cohen record, I suppose, would be a more proper way of putting it. These are the final pieces, because I find it hard to call these tracks, the final pieces that Cohen was working on before his death. Of course, he did You Want It Darker, which ended up being released 3 weeks before his death, but I think he finished it in spring, summer of 2016. And in those final months when, at this time he was pretty much housebound, he couldn't move very well, and he was, battling cancer as well at that point. He was still writing a lot of poetry. He was still trying to record recitations of poetry, which is part of what this record is, but he was also writing songs as well, which is also part of what this record is. So while Thanks for the Dance is not necessarily the equal of You Want It Darker in any way, I don't think it's anywhere close to being as satisfying of a listening experience. I think it's an artifact, and I think it's an extremely effective artifact. And it's an artifact of a part of Cohen's career that I've always been really partial to. Spoiler alert, the other records that I have coming in the mail that I ordered are actually all late career Leonard Cohen records. The 3 albums before this, as a matter of fact. I already had You Want It Darker on vinyl, but it was kind of a bulk deal. Figured I'd get 1 copy to play and 1 copy to display. So I've always been partial to Leonard Cohen's last work anyways. And Thanks for the Dance continues the trend in a very effective way. Happens to the Heart, The Night of Santiago, and Listen to the Hummingbird. Listen to the Hummingbird is... I love that. That is... that's a poem that's a work of Cohen's that gets me, I think. And maybe that's because of the finality of it, that's because of the context, but I enjoy it. I think it's a really moving, really powerful little piece. So, it's a good album. It's certainly not where I would go to when starting off talking about Leonard Cohen records, but it's really, can't complain. It's good. Okay. I found a copy of this album, which very debatably might be the most significant record in my entire listening experience, and maybe I should have ended with this, but it's fine because I'm holding it in my hands right now. That's the Beatles' 1967 to 1970, the Blue Album. I could go on and on about how influential this album is to my music listening. This was the record that got me into the Beatles back when I was a youngster, and I performed across the universe in this kind of contingent theater collective that I was a part of when I was like 8. We were performing across the universe. Across the Universe was on this collection, and this is like one of the only Beatles-related things that my parents had. So we put this on in the car. We would listen to it every weekend when we would drive out to the place. I just got so used to these songs, and I got so used to this sequencing in particular, that even now when I listen to these tracks in this order, something about them feels right, even if they are tracks that are plucked out of records. Even if I can argue that the White Album is grossly underrepresented here. Grossly underrepresented. I still find something incredibly satisfying about it, and something so familiar about all of this. I do like the re-releases that they did last year, and I cannot justify spending $75 or whatever it is on each of the triple LP sets. So I've just been telling myself I'll wait until I find one of these for a reasonably cheap price. This was about $20, so I had to get it. I love it. It's extremely important. I got the Red Album after that, when I was a kid anyways. That was a Christmas present, I think, and that's what started the whole Beatles obsession, and it kind of just has continued from there. All right. Ray Charles, Rock and Roll. Well, that's what this thing calls it. I think this is actually the Rock and Roll series by Atlantic, if memory serves. This album is just called Ray Charles. This is not an original. This is a reissue from the 60s, I want to say, but still, this is, technically speaking, the debut LP release from Ray Charles, and it is a collection of his early singles, like Come Back Baby, Drown in My Own Tears, Hallelujah, I Love Her So, Mess Around, and I Got a Woman. All these songs on this record, I think if you're looking for LPs specifically and not talking about singles, this is one of the most important LP releases of the 1950s. Undoubtedly. And I think the record itself is not necessarily in superb condition, which again is okay. There are new copies of this that are actually fairly cheap themselves, but this was like $8. So again, maybe this is display material at some point. But really cool pickup. really cool to have that. And now for a bit of modern soul, if you will. Bruno Mars, 24 Karat Magic. Man, I've got a lot of nostalgia for this record too. This dropped in fall 2016. And I remember listening to this record while studying for my first finals in college. And you know what? That was a miserable time. I'm not going to lie. I didn't do well in a lot of those finals for a lot of different reasons. But 24 Karat Magic, the record, I think I really connected with the joy in this album. Bruno Mars, Bruno Mars, I think it'll be interesting to see how his material ages. I kind of think that as time goes on, Bruno Mars's material will actually age better and better. We're already seeing it with his Silk Sonic project. Of course, he just did the single with Lady Gaga, which has been very positively received by a lot of people. So I think his music overall will age well. Now, that said, this thing won the Grammy for Album of the Year or whatever. I know a lot of people complained about that. It is what it is. But there's a lot of jams on here. The title track, Perm, Versace on the Floor, Finesse. Just a bunch of just fire tracks with great playing on them. Mars, of course, is a phenomenal singer who's got the charm of Michael Jackson and James Brown, but without the skeletons in his closet, at least as far as we know. And yeah, I'm partial to it. I really like it. I'm very excited to hopefully hear another Bruno Mars solo record at some point, just to hear what he sounds like now, almost 10 years down the line, believe it or not. Next record, another more recent release. This is Girl in Red, If I Could Make It Go Quiet. Girl in Red are a band that I was put on to by a coworker. Well, actually, I think a friend of mine kind of put me onto them, and then a coworker of mine also put me onto them. And I only knew the song Serotonin, which is the opening track on here, and I knew I really liked it. But then Girl in Red ended up being one of the opening acts for Taylor Swift when she came through like part of the leg of her Eras tour, including the show that I saw her at back in June of 2023. So Girl in Red was one of the opening acts, and seeing them perform live in a stadium, I guess I can say I don't know if it sounded entirely natural, but boy, I think that the lead singer is, a pretty engaging frontman, I suppose. And the actual tracks themselves, they do have a lot of energy. Again, is it necessarily like stadium energy? Could I see them headlining a stadium right now with this material? Probably not. But this shit would go hard in the club. I can tell you that. Or at least in like a medium-sized to smaller venue. And I have not heard their most recent album. I know that critics generally have been a little bit kind of hit or miss on Girl in Red as far as full-length releases go. But I do quite like this one. I think it's a solid bit of kind of indie pop rock. A little bit of edge to it, but also quite a bit of melodic sensibility as well, which I appreciate. All right, I talked about being on a Bob Dylan kick, and I've got 2 records of his to show off here. Full disclosure, I am seeing Bob Dylan in a couple of weeks now, as it turns out. The Outlaws Tour, it's actually a week and a half now, I guess. The Outlaws Tour that Dylan is on with Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp is on this leg. They are going to be coming by the Upper Midwest. I get to see one of the shows that they're going to be playing out here, so I'm really excited about that. It's one of those things where it kind of is what it is, right? Bob Dylan's in his 80s, Willie Nelson is in his 90s. You're going to get what you're going to get, but it's also one of those things where I don't want to miss what might be the last opportunity I ever have to see either of them perform live. And I think it's going to be a hell of a memory regardless of what happens. So I'm really excited for that. But I've got two records. I'll actually show this one first. Switch around here. Nashville Skyline. I love Nashville Skyline, man. I understand why it's not everybody's cup of tea per se. It's not necessarily what you go to Bob Dylan for in a Bob Dylan record. But I think that the switch into full-blown country music not only works really well for what Dylan was doing at the time with where he was at during this time, but it also allows him to show off dexterity, especially as a vocalist. A lot of people talk about Dylan's vocals on this record, and I think they are some of the loveliest that he ever put down on any sort of record. It's just pure, it's kind of pure bliss. It doesn't challenge me as much as some of Dylan's best records do. And I don't think I would put it in the uppermost echelon of Dylan works, but yeah, I mean, so many solid tracks here. So many tracks that just make me want to kind of lounge on my couch with the windows open, even though this is a 105-degree humidity day. I just want to lounge in my couch with my windows open and with a straw sipping my drink. This peach-flavored green tea lemonade from Starbucks, I guess, is the best I've got right now. Yeah, it's domestic bliss. I think that's the part of Dylan's... I think this part of Dylan's career is very much underestimated and underappreciated because it is so immersed in its domesticity. It's immersed in Dylan feeling content being away from the spotlight. And people can't deal with that well because that's not what they want Dylan to be. They want Dylan to be somebody who is not seeking the spotlight, but not away from it. Like, we don't necessarily want Dylan to be doing shit to make people remember that he's still here. We don't want Dylan to be an attention grabber, but we want him around, and we want him producing music and performing shows and doing all that sort of thing. And this era of John Wesley Harding, Nashville Skyline, Self-Portrait, New Morning, Pat Garrett, etc., like, all of that is the exact opposite of Dylan being a guy in the spotlight. It's Dylan not wanting to be in the spotlight. And, you know, there's value in that. There's value in that. Yeah. Okay. So, great album. Probably top 10 Dylan. Definitely top 10 Dylan for me, I think. Probably not top 5, but it's not too far off. And this record, I don't think is top 10 Dylan for me, but I respect it a lot. That is Infidels. Yeah. The opening track, Joker Man, as many people say very correctly, is one of the best Dylan songs that he ever wrote, and is perhaps the best Dylan song of the 80s. Sweetheart Like You, the second track, is really great. And then you get to, like, Neighborhood Bully, which is just kind of a piece of trash. And the album never fully recovers from there, in my opinion. It peaks very early on and has a real tough time trying to keep back on track. But it's one of the only times in the 80s where Dylan finds himself focused on something that isn't religion, I suppose. I don't mean to put down the Christian albums. They have all risen in my esteem, at least to some extent, with this most recent listen through, especially Slow Train Coming. But Infidels feels like he's tapped into a style of songwriting, if not necessarily a production style, that suits him and that makes him feel like a vanguard again, if only for a short moment. And again, you're going to have these short moments from time to time after this. I think a couple of his tracks on Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, at least, fall into that category. Oh Mercy absolutely falls into that category. I think he has individual songs on like Empire Burlesque, which I actually think is like okay. Not very good, but okay. And Under the Red Sky has one or two decent tracks. He has moments on these records, but again, it's not going to coalesce until a truly phenomenal front-to-back record that also has follow-ups that are consistently great until Time Out of Mind. Like Oh Mercy, which I don't have here, but I would like to get one day. Oh Mercy is a fantastic record, in my opinion. Absolutely phenomenal. But again, it was not something he could follow. It was very much kind of a one-off. But Time Out of Mind, he was able to follow up. That's the big thing. It's not. I do think Time Out of Mind is better, but it's not just because of that. It's because Dylan was able to sustain his success after that. That is why I value it. Also, by the way, I told you I'd listened to the bootleg series as well. Fucking Blind Willie McTell, man. One of my favorite Dylan songs I've ever heard. And the fact that it didn't make Infidels is an absolute tragedy. If it did make Infidels, I mean, I'd have it a lot higher in my Dylan rankings for sure. So I don't entirely get that. I'm not one to question artists' sequencing decisions, but Blind Willie McTell is a banger. All right. Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga, Love for Sale. I'm going to be very transparent with you. I've not heard this record. I got this album because it was actually pretty damn cheap and is in really, really good condition. It's a significant record because it is the last thing that Tony Bennett put out before his death back in 2021. And, you know, Bennett at this point, from what I understand, was suffering from Alzheimer's as he was recording these tracks. I know in their initial collaboration, Cheek to Cheek, I know that was a lot more kind of interactive, and in this one I think it was a little bit less so because Bennett himself was kind of limited in what he could do. But from clips that I've heard, I think I've heard one or two of these, like the title track, you know, you can't really feel it. I still would say it sounds more natural, at least the parts that I've heard, still sound more natural than like Frank Sinatra's duets records. And I think that speaks to the fact that even in his last years, Tony Bennett was extremely charismatic, and Sinatra, bless his heart, just was not in the physical or mental state to be in that place. And Gaga is just terrific. You know, I've got so many positive things to say about Lady Gaga in general. And I think she fits into this stuff really well. So I'm very happy to have this, and I look forward to listening to it properly one day. All right, making a dent in this. Billie Eilish, Happier Than Ever. I talked a bit about Billie Eilish in my last video when I talked about her most recent record, which I got on vinyl, Hit Me Hard and Soft. And Happier Than Ever, you know, like I think I said in that video, this is my least favorite Billie Eilish record, but that doesn't mean much when I tell you that Billie Eilish has had one of the most incredible starts to a career that I can remember, as far as just making consistently phenomenal pop albums, herself and Phineas in collaboration. And I think this record maybe struggles from being kind of oversized, 16 tracks, so there's a lot to chew on here. It feels maybe a little bit self-consciously safe compared to her other two records, which I think to an extent is her trying to respond to critics, kind of saying that she doesn't need to be that, like, she's not a gimmick, like she's actually like a strong songwriter in her own right, and because of that these songs are a bit more stripped back and not as aggressive in their production. And it works. It works because it's a really, you know, it is a diverse album in its own way, in its own more muted way, I suppose. I just am less likely to put this on than I am the other two, but again, that's all relative, and I think this would still be most artists, pop or otherwise. I think most artists would kill to have a record as good as this one, let alone as good as the other two. But yeah, untouchable discography. I love, Yeah. Billy Bossa Nova, My Future, Oxytocin, Your Power, Happier Than Ever. A lot of, again, a lot of phenomenal songs on here. What do you want me to say? Like, apart from that original EP that she did, Don't Smile at Me, which even then I think that's good. It's just not quite as it's more obviously taking from other people than her other stuff is. Like, even with that, I think you still can't really complain about that discography. It's really great. All right. Peter Gabriel. Um, Again, one of the many self-titled records. I am overdue for a Peter Gabriel kind of reappraisal, I suppose. Um, you know, Gabriel. I listened to all his stuff a long time, well, a few years ago now, and I remember really being partial to. I like the first four. I like the first four, and I would say that this one is probably my favorite of the first four. It has Shock the Monkey, which certainly is a point in its favor. But I think for the most part, I was partial to So, Us, and Up more than any of the others. I think that kind of stretch of three records, and Passion. I think Passion is phenomenal. And a record, maybe I'll cool down on it when I revisit it, but I think especially when you consider that it's a soundtrack piece and is meant to kind of be associated with another form of media, the fact that it works so well as a standalone piece is just all credit to it. But yeah, so again, it's been a while since I went back to Gabriel's discography, but I can safely say this is one of the higher ones. But again, I think apart from, I don't think there's really an obvious low point in Gabriel's discography. I guess I haven't heard his most recent one, so I can't comment on that one. But even the covers records, I think, are intriguing for what they are, for sure. Okay, this is another album I've not heard in a really long time, so I don't have that much to say about it. But I remember thinking it's really good. I know other friends of mine are really into it. That is Procol Harum's A Salty Dog. I know a lot of people who would say that this is the best Procol Harum album. When I listened to their first 4 or 5 records a long time ago, I also agreed with that. Again, a great bit of kind of psychedelic rock, psychedelic pop rock, I suppose, from kind of the end of the 60s. But I don't really have especially detailed notes to add to that. So this is another one worth revisiting. And cheap as hell, too, by the way. $10 for this really good condition copy, apart from some tearing on the spine here, I suppose. Yeah, I'll take it. But yes, excited to revisit that. All right, we got 3 more here. Panic at the Disco. Death of a Bachelor. Okay, this is going to be kind of a left field choice, I think. Because I have not really talked at all on this channel about Panic at the Disco, as far as I can tell anyways, as far as I can remember. But I like them overall. I am certainly more open to them than others in the, other folks who make YouTube videos who have a lot of the same musical interests that I do. And I think that is especially the case with this era of Panic at the Disco. A lot of that is a nostalgia thing. So I talked about 24 Karat Magic, and that I have nostalgia for that because of the period in my life that it came into. And that's true. And the same is true for Death of a Bachelor. This record came out in early 2016, if memory serves. And so a lot of these tracks were inescapable. on radio. Maybe not as inescapable as Pray for the Wicked was. I have a lot of memories of hearing all of those goddamn tracks. Hey Look My Eye Made It and High Hopes especially. Just everywhere. But this record was everywhere too. And, you know, it is excessive. It is a lot. And, you know, your mileage will may vary certainly, as far as how much you're willing to buy into what they're doing here. It's very garish production. It is very over the top. It is very eccentric and loud. And if that's not your thing, then you're probably going to hate this. But I can tolerate it in doses, and I think what they do here, there's a lot of kind of, I think, sarcasm here. There's a lot of very snippy lyrics. I think Brendon Urie is a lyricist. I've never been that keen on him. You know, he took over the lyrical duties from the other guy whose name is escaping me right now, after the second record. And, you know, I think it was a bit of a slow burn trying to get him to, you know, write lyrics that were probably on par with what was on the band's first couple of records. But he's got some solid lines on here, right? Like crazy equals genius, the fucking Beach Boys lines on here. Maybe that's not a clever thing, but I think it's there's some cleverness to it. I'm just partial to it because it's a Beach Boys reference on a major pop record. It's kind of funny. But Victorious, Emperor's New Clothes, Death of a Bachelor, phenomenal vocal there. Crazy equals genius, LA Devotee, Golden Days. So many songs here where the hooks are just kind of hitting you left and right. Urie is a vocalist, probably the best male pop singer of the last 20 years. I know a lot of people don't like his voice very much or think it's a little bit too much. That's fine. That's fine. But that reminds me a little bit of critiques that some of the other famous rock frontmen have had levied against them in their days. I mean, people felt the way about Queen and Freddie Mercury, right? So this is not to say Brendon Urie is as good as Freddie Mercury. I'm just saying, think about how well some of those criticisms are going to age before you run your mouth. That's all. Anyways, it's a really good album. It's not my favorite. Pretty Odd is my favorite Panic record because I think that's great for a lot of reasons. But Death of a Bachelor is really solid, really well done. Really kind of all over the place. I respect it a lot. Black Sabbath, Paranoid. All right. Yeah, what can you say about Paranoid, man? It's not my favorite Sabbath record. That honor would go to none other than Master of Reality. But, and I do respect the debut a lot. I do enjoy it a lot. I re-listened to it not too long ago, and I liked it more than I thought I did. But, man, I just think this whole album is so fucking sharp. Like, were it not for the goddamn drum solo in the middle, which I'm a drummer, I love drum solos, I respect them, but were it not for Bill Ward kind of thwacking around, creating this, what I think to this day is still kind of this, like, lesser version of Moby Dick. Were it not for that, it would be a pretty much immaculate album. That first side, I don't have any notes on. War Pigs, Paranoid, Iron Man, and the criminally underrated Planet Caravan, which is a contender for my favorite song on the entire record. I think it's phenomenal. I think there's a whole, I think progressive metal as a genre is contained in that song. The genesis of bands like Tool and shit like that, go back to that song. I would say go back to that song over even anything on the debut Black Sabbath record, and you got yourself a hit. All right. But yeah, Paranoid. Absolutely phenomenal record. Phenomenal record. Really glad to own it. I think that's my first Sabbath. Yeah, it is my first Sabbath. So really happy about that. Okay. It's getting dark outside. The storms are coming. And that's fine, because we got one more record coming. And I tell you what, you want to talk about storms, you want to talk about stormy, evil, nasty, villainous records, well, you got one here. Mad Villainy. Really happy to own this, man. One of the most just intriguing, interesting hip hop albums ever made. So much has been said about it. So much was said about it before the passing of MF Doom a few years back, and so much has been said afterwards. But the mixture of interesting production and samples collected by Madlib on here, the formation of all those samples into this, you know, it's not a story by any means. I don't think there's narrative here, but Mad Villainy as a record is so tied thematically into this idea of superheroes and comic books and this almost like childlike adolescent perspective into heroism and what American culture was like. Like it's almost a snapshot back to a different era, 40s, 50s, 60s America. And it's, you know, you take all these samples and whatever, and between that and, you know, Doom's rapping, which just absolutely kicks it into a whole other gear. You know, everyone says he's one of the best rap lyricists ever. I see no reason to disagree with that. He's certainly one of the best rappers ever as far as how he kind of takes these bars that he's doing and just shoves them into these irregular meters. The way he kind of, I don't know, the way he orients his rhyme schemes in ways so that he's dropping a bunch of different syllables that rhyme with each other into the same line and then alternating them between different lines. You know, there are literally people who make their careers studying shit like what Mad Villain is doing here. Go look up Robert Komanecki, the pop music theory scholar, who is these days very popular on social media for his kind of random associated posts. But that's Robert's bread and butter, is studying rappers, studying hip-hop music, studying rhyme schemes and things like that. That's how he got his PhD. I've read some of his published work, so I'm aware of this, and studied it in college and that sort of thing. So there's so much to chew on in this album. There's so much to chew on. And, you know, is it the most experimental thing that hip-hop was doing in 2004? I don't know about that. Not that I have a super deep knowledge, but I know of other groups that were doing similar or comparable things around this time. And I'm sure there were plenty that were getting wilder than this as well. But I think when you consider how well executed this is, how thematically consistent it is, and you pair that with this, you know, I think the hooks and things like that, even though these songs are a little bit stilted, even though a lot of these songs are on the shorter side, even though this is 22 songs long, I think there's still a level of accessibility here that kind of allows this record to have gotten the commercial acclaim that it did. I think were it not for the execution, and were it not for, maybe it's the themes that people connect with, maybe it's the fact that Doom was respected in his way before this record came out. I don't know, but there's something about this album that I think connects with quote-unquote normies in a way that other hip-hop music doesn't. And because of that, I think it is such a gateway into these other aspects of the genre that I think is just so damn cool. So I'm happy to own it. It's one of, I don't know if it's a top 5 favorite hip-hop album for me necessarily, but I adore it. I respect it a ton, and I think its importance cannot be overstated. So really happy to own it. All right. That is everything. That is everything that I purchased vinyl-wise over the last month or so. Certainly there will be more videos like this. There will also be, hopefully, book reviews and other sort of content to come, as hopefully things begin settling down a little bit more and I can kind of get back to brass tacks, as it were. But until then, y'all are amazing. Thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for following along. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you have not done that. more videos, more reviews, and things like that, like I said, are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications, and then make sure to tell a friend as well. It really helps when you kind of spread the word to other folks who you think might enjoy quality content such as this. Thanks so much again for watching, and I will see you all right here at your home, the Music Deep Dive.